So John Wayne Troxell, up front, I just want to highlight that it's always you hear kind of this strange relationship between officers and NCOs, where it's this professional thing, and it kind of is what it is. And I'd like to highlight that as long as I've known you, which is somewhere in the ballpark of, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years, whatever it is, I have always looked to you as a mentor. The way that you carry yourself, et cetera, it's one of the ones that is easily described as you do what you say, right? You walk the walk, all those things. So I appreciate you, and I always have, and I think of you as a mentor. And I also think that that you're the real deal. You know, you are the type of person that when you say it, you mean it, and people trust in you. So I appreciate pretty much everything that you have going. So how are you doing, John Wayne? What's new with you?
Life is good right now. So, it's almost funny calling you Josh, since, I've always known you as a captain, a major, stuff like that. But, I retired after almost 38 years of active duty. My last duty position was as the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense. So I worked for 45 months for Marine General Joe Dunford. And then my last 3 months, I had the honor of being with General Milley as he came in as the chairman. And then I also served for Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, Secretary Jim Mattis, and then ultimately Secretary Esper my last few months. I left the position in December and retired, 20 years as a command sergeant major. And then, the highlight was we finally got the distinctive SEAC rank and title written into DoD policy, so that now the SEAC has a distinctive rank and title, much like the Sergeant Major of the Army and the other service guys. So, like General Milley said when he pinned it on me 10 days before I came out of position, hey, look, you won't be able to wear this very long, but you can be buried in it now. So, so when I transitioned out, I wanted to still do things that I really enjoyed doing, which is supporting our active duty members, our families, our veterans, and get after some of the key issues that we have to deal with, especially for an expeditionary force that's going to continue to deploy and fight or do other things to continue to defend our homeland and our way of life, and be there for our allies and partners. So I started my own consulting company, PME Hard Consulting. Imagine that name, PME Hard. And now I work for 7 different businesses, mainly veteran support organizations and military support organizations, also in the fitness industry. And believe it or not, I'm a military consultant to a film production company in Hollywood. So life is going pretty good. Sandra and I loved our time when we were together up here at Joint Base Lewis McChord when I was the first Corps Sergeant Major. And prior to that, as a 4th Stryker Brigade 2ID Sergeant Major in '05 to '08. And so our children were up here. So now I'm retired. I live in Lakewood, Washington, and enjoying life right now.
Awesome. It's great to hear, that, on the transition, and continuing to make a difference. But I don't want to talk about that one yet. So for those that are not indoctrinated, talk to them about what PME Hard is and what that means.
So, I've always been a fitness guy throughout my career, and I understood fitness as a function of lethality and readiness. And I don't care how much of a good a soldier is as a marksman or a medic or whatever, if they cannot get to the objective because of a lack of fitness, then they're of no use to the organization. I also saw this, as I was coming up through the ranks and I was getting ready to go to Ranger School and everything, and I kept telling myself that if I could run 5 miles in under 40 minutes in BDUs, and if I could do all the things, that I would be okay. And I would see others focusing more on practicing land nav and stuff like this. And then they would get to Ranger School and couldn't even do 6 pull-ups, And so I saw it as I was coming through the ranks that in order for us to be technically and tactically proficient, we have to first be physically, mentally, and emotionally ready and lethal. And that's where I came up with the term hard. And I really started, I coined the phrase during the surge in Iraq in 2007 and 8, when I was really growing into functional fitness, still doing the normal kind of cardio and stuff, but I grew into functional fitness to get after building my internal body armor, you know, the core, which is key when we're wearing 60 to 80 pounds of kit and any other kinds of ancillary equipment. And I noticed as I'd be out on patrol as a brigade command sergeant major, and I'd be able to take a knee, you know, as a guy pushing towards 50 years old, and next to these 20-year-old guys that were struggling to take a knee, or they would have to bend over to take the pressure off their back and everything. And I learned then that these insidious kind of enemies that we were facing, that we've all faced in Iraq and Afghanistan, are going to be generational, and they're going to be around. Now, don't get me wrong, we still have to have the lethality and readiness and preparedness for high-end decisive action combat and everything, but we still have to have that ability to get out in the places like the Hindu Kush Mountains, or out in the palm groves, or wherever we need to get. We got to have that requisite fitness level to be able to get after that kind of enemy like we faced in terms of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or whoever it's been. And so I coined the phrase PME hard, that not only physically, but mentally and emotionally, we have to be prepared for the worst day of our life. And, you know, the worst day of our life in combat is against a numerically superior enemy force. And we are, you know, fighting for our lives, not only to defeat this threat, but fighting for the man and woman on our left and right. And so I just kind of started using that phrase, and that's been my guideline on how to build a foundation for lethality and readiness from the squad level all the way up to the major combatant command level, in order to be able to get after the threats that we may face. And so that's kind of what PME hard is. And, you know, it encompasses all kinds of things that I do when I work out. And, you know, I know you had Tony Spadaro on your last show, and he's a very good friend of mine. We worked together for the last 4 years when he was the Indo-PACOM Sergeant Major, but he's been a guy that's done a lot of PME hard stuff with me, and I've kind of taken PME hard to the point of now it's about inspiring troops and intimidating the enemy. And we do that through not only being physically, mentally, and emotionally hard, but technically and tactically proficient in every aspect of our mission as a warfighter. And he kind of had a splinter comment on that called being lethal and intimidating. So I think it all begins with that foundation of being physically ready for whatever could happen on the worst day of our life. And that's where I got the phrase from.
Yeah, so I love it. I remember we talked about this beforehand, but Junkyard PT, one of the first indoctrinations, the first time that I met you was working out, you know, there on the parade field at JBLM, which is awesome. But the you know, what's interesting are those other aspects that I think are often overlooked, is the mental and the emotional piece. We want to kind of tough guy or tough gal or whatever, and just think about being hard physically. But talk to me a little bit about the other aspects, the mental and the emotional piece.
Yeah, this is critical. Hey, combat is brutal and unforgiving, and we all know that. And even though the character of conflict could change, and it is changing, where now we're as a strategic force, we're moving into space, you know, cyber as a weapon, and you know, the nuclear triad is now alive and well again. So the character of conflict may continue to change, but the exact nature of conflict will never change. And that is two opposing wills coming at each other to defeat them, each other. And so, and the longer we are doing this kind of nature of conflict, or getting after conflict, it can have a mental and emotional toll. And when I say being physically, mentally, and emotionally ready, that means we have to understand that the enemy gets a vote in everything we do. And so we have to be mentally and emotionally prepared for that. Unfortunately, when we go to combat, good men and women will die. That's rule number one. And rule number two is no commander or senior enlisted leader can do anything about that. We can mitigate the effects of it by being as prepared as we can, honed in our fighting skills, being proficient in our battle drills and everything. But in the end, the enemy will always get a vote, and we have to be prepared that bad things can happen. And just because bad things happen doesn't mean we failed as a leader. And so when I talk all the time, especially as the SEAC, I talk, about, hey, there's always going to be the need for us to drop bombs on people, shoot them in the face, or beat them to death with our entrenching tools if we have to. That's the kind of behavior and attitude we have to have as warfighters. But understand over a period of time, the mental and emotional toll it can take on troops is a reality. And it's not a sign of weakness that PTSD is a reality and that traumatic brain injury is a reality. It is just a function of what happens when we are, and as I say all the time, it is normal reactions to the abnormal circumstances we serve in combat. So one of the things I'm doing now is I'm a big advocate about getting after this PTSD and TBI thing and making sure that we understand it's a normal function of what happens in combat. It shouldn't be an excuse for somebody to go out and have ill behavior, but it's something that we should understand is going to happen. And the mental and emotional toll that combat takes is a reality. And we have to be sensitive to that, and we have to continue to prepare for that, which is why the more physically fit I think we are, the more mental and emotional fit we will be, and the more we will be able to handle those rigors and outcomes that happen in combat. And when it comes to, what happens, almost none of it is bad. For every good that we have in terms of defeating the enemy or stabilizing the population or assisting a government or partner forces, the bad is going to happen and people are going to get hurt and people are going to get killed. It's just the nature of the business that we're in. And so the mental and emotional part is as important as that physical part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one of the keys that you hit on is that it's a normal response to abnormal circumstances, conditions, experiences, et cetera. And that's one of the biggest things that I have seen change or adapt that I think is very positive in the force.
Yeah.
I remember my first deployment, getting blown up the first couple of times, 2004, figuring it out, and nobody talked about it. We were all, affected by these experiences, these major life experiences, but we didn't talk about it. And I think it's really good that people like you, people like Tony Spadaro are talking about their experiences and sharing it and sharing that it is a normal response. But that's where, I talked about this a little bit the other day. I did a short video clip that, the way to influence PTSD or to influence the folks that are challenged, or one of the ways to do it that's tangible, is just by talking to those people that are having challenges and interacting with them when they're down, and continuing to reinforce that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. And I tell people all the time, people think that PTSD means that you're at this utmost level where you're doing things that is ill behavior that is a result of alcohol and drug abuse, and it's violating the law and things like that. Don't get me wrong, things like that happen. But the vast majority of people are still functioning as combat leaders and warrior leaders, and they are suffering from PTSD. And people ask me all the time, but what do you mean by that? I said, how many of you here, and I would even ask those that are in this webinar, how many of you go into a restaurant when we could go into a restaurant and you immediately identified what are the high-speed avenues of approach to get in and out of there? The front door, the back door, where the food is brought out at, and you sat where you had eyes on those avenues. That is a normal reaction to being in an abnormal situation where you did not want to. The fear was that you would be caught off guard and you weren't prepared. And that's normal, Now, the normal American that has never been in those kind of abnormal circumstances may look at us as we're trying to do our, intelligence preparation of the battlefield in Denny's, this guy might be weird. Or if I'm out on a run, running around my neighborhood and a car pulls up alongside of me just out of the blue, the person is pulling over to talk on their cell phone. But in the world I grew up in Iraq and Afghanistan, if a car pulled up like that, I had to be leery. So all of a sudden I'm getting in this imaginary low ready position with this imaginary M4, and I'm about to look down my holographic sight to make sure that I can eliminate this threat. That's normal. Now, again, people may look at that and say, man, that guy needs some help, but those are normal reactions to the abnormal circumstances we've been in. And we have to understand that. And the best way to get after it is to be able to talk about it. I remember when the worst day of my career was 19 July 2007. I was the 4th Stryker Brigade 2ID Sergeant Major, routine patrol with my commander, John Lair. We go out that day to visit a unit, and we got hit by an ambush, and an explosive form penetrator hit the lead striker. It killed one of our young infantrymen, and it severely wounded our fire support officer. And next thing you know, we found ourselves in a firefight out here on the middle of this road out there, And when it was over with, nobody was talking about this. And so when we got back after, taking this hero to the morgue, I pulled everybody together and said, hey, look, this is a function of what combat is. None of us wanted this young trooper to die today, but unfortunately this happened. Nobody wanted our fire support guy to be medevaced out and now, to, be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. But this is a function of combat. And I said, and guess what else? We got to be ready because we're going right back out that wire again tomorrow. So I think more and more, we have to be able to discuss these kind of things and have a dialogue amongst leaders that it's okay for somebody to come and say, hey, I may need to talk to a professional. Over.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And, I was watching the chat, as you discussed that, and everyone in the chat is kind of saying the same thing. When you were talking about, sitting and facing the door, et cetera, people talking about traffic or, vehicles stopping or potholes, and everyone is saying, yes, yep, I agree, on and on and on, all the way down. Now, so here's the challenge.
I would even throw this one out. I would even throw this one out, and I'll throw this one to you, Josh. How many times has somebody just, innocently enough startled you and you got extremely upset because you got startled? Not so much that you got upset that the person startled you. You got upset because you got caught off guard and you were startled. And when I say this all the time, PTSD, the anger that comes from PTSD is born out of grief and fear. The grief is what we've been through, whether, the personal injuries we've suffered from being blown up or being in combat, or the loss of good men and women out there. That's the grief part of it. Or severely wounding, the VSIs or SIs we've suffered. The fear is not the fear of combat. It's the fear of not being prepared and being caught off guard. So, when we go in and we sit with our back so that we can see the doors in restaurants, or if somebody startles us and we get upset, it's because we were caught off guard. And it's the fear that we are not prepared. Two things I think everybody on this webinar knows: that when we go to combat, physically, all of us want to come home. We want to come back to our loved ones. We want to bring all of the men and women home that are in our charge. But unfortunately, as I mentioned before, that isn't the case all the time. So there's a bit of a mental and emotional transition that we understand the enemy's going to get a vote, and we understand that I may not come back home from this deployment. And so we go out and we do all the things we need to do to make sure we and the men and women on our left and right come home. But we understand that when we go out the gate that day, we may not be coming back into the combat outpost that day from whatever that mission is. And there's that mental and emotional agility so that we're prepared for it in combat. Well, the vast majority of us do come home. And now we have to do another mental and emotional agile movement by understanding that every day we're going to be graced with life back here. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, anything can happen back here. You can get hit by a car. But the chances of us getting blown up or getting shot at with an RPG or something like that in Lakewood, Washington, are slim to none. And there's another mental agility that has to happen, that the normal things now are going to our daughter's dance recital tonight, or that the cable guy is upping the bill $5 for this month or whatever, and the normal things that our families have to deal with. And so I think we have to understand that as well, that this mental and emotional piece is something that we do all the time. and that the more we talk about it and the more we share amongst each other as warrior leaders and members of this warrior class, the better off we're going to be with those that end up having challenges with PTSD and go across that line that starts violating law and other things, or worse yet, they start having suicidal ideations and thoughts, and ultimately some of them, you know, do something that they can never recover from, and that's actually committing suicide.
Yeah. So I've got a couple quick things that I'm going to throw out. So number one, for all the participants, which is a whole ton right now, get those questions and answers. So the Q&A section rolling, get some questions in there. I see them popping in, and then I'm going to throw a challenge out to everybody in the audience. And you may have seen my video on this after PT session the other day. So we've got the 22 for veteran suicide awareness, et cetera, which is great. And if you're doing that, that's awesome. But what we've just talked about here is common sense to the majority of us. We're like, yes, we've got to talk about it. It makes sense. Everyone has issues coming back. You've got to work through, et cetera. That is not common knowledge to all of your soldiers. And I'll share this one, just from my perspective. A couple of years back, I had a good friend and a guy that I went downrange with, that I fought shoulder to shoulder with, who killed himself. And I'm not going to give any details about him because, it's personal for his family, et cetera. However, this is what I will give you from my perspective. I knew that he had issues, and I did not talk to him about his issues. I didn't check in with him about his issues. I didn't make sure that he was okay. So I could have done more, is the takeaway there. So my challenge to everyone that is online right now is think about two of the soldiers or leaders or anyone that you've interacted with in your time in the military that may be having some issues, and give them a phone call today, tomorrow, the next day, doesn't matter. Give them a phone call and check in with them. See how they're doing. Make sure they're okay, and see if you can get them some help. What do you think, sir, Major? Good challenge.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Hey, the last thing I would say to this. So I retired institutionalized, basically, with 37 years, 10 months, and 29 days of active duty. The last 4 years serving as the SEAC and living on Fort Myer, where my next door neighbors were the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of Staff of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. I was on the most secure base in the world. And for the last 25 years, I've lived on military bases. And now I retire, and my wife and I buy a home. And so I bought a house in a gated community. Nothing wrong with that. But, a gated community to me says I'm kind of in a forward operating base or a combat outpost. I spent $4,000 on a home security system, with cameras and alarms and everything. And I sleep with a loaded pistol and an unsheathed survival knife in my nightstand drawer. To our culture, that's normal, I mean, I am just preparing myself and layering that I'm prepared if there's an intruder coming into my house, because of the way I've been conditioned over 38 years. When I say things like that to the general public, people think I'm paranoid, all right? But I go back to, these are normal reactions to the abnormal circumstances we've been in. And when this coronavirus thing started hitting, even going outside that gated community, here was another invisible enemy, much like an insurgent or a terrorist, that we had to deal with. And going outside this gated community, I would feel the hair coming up on the back of my neck because, I was looking to see if I had my Rhino device on my Chevy Tahoe, or, or if I turned on my counter IED stuff, and everything. And so, I mean, my point in all of this is, for all of us in this webinar, this is normal stuff. But when we retire, like I am now, and I live in a community that I live in now, people are going to look at me like, oh, wow, this guy's a little different, okay? But understand that that's just the way we are. And you're not going to retire and, all of a sudden advise a film production company and think that you're going to forget, in a hurry, what it meant to be a member of this warrior class, especially over decades. So, I would just say, more and more as we move forward, we have to be open about this, that this is how we are as members of this warrior class.
Right on. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. So let's talk about that. Back to the transition and getting yourself out of the gated community that you lived in DC on a military base, and over to the gated community that you live in now out there in Washington. How long did you spend in uniform? Over,
Uh, so I got sworn into the military on the 4th of May, 1982. And my official retirement date was 31 March of 2020. So 37 years, 10 months, and 29 days total service, with the
so,
last
so
20
the dates
years command sergeant major.
So the dates that we came in are around about the same because I came in 17 August 81 into the world. So that's about, it's about the same dates there. So, so, uh,
Thanks for
so
telling me how
after,
old I am.
no, 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 you're only as old as you feel. So let's
That's right.
talk a little bit about that transition. After all of that time in the military, after 20 years as a sergeant major, what was that like to transition into the civilian world and become Mr. Troxell? To change that aspect of who you are and what.
So mine is a little different because, when I took over, when General Dunford selected me as the SEAC and I was sworn in DC on the 11th of December of 2015, I knew that in 4 years I was done. There's no other position I could take. I was at the pinnacle of the DoD. So I knew that in 4 years I was going to be done. Um, and then, having served in DC under the two different administrations, the first year under the Obama administration, the last 3 years under the Trump administration, in the last 2 years, seeing how, as we tried and we remained apolitical, how much the military was trying to be forced into the political situation. I was uh, I was starting to get a little frustrated with that, and it really started the first year I was there in the job when, you know, we're talking about trying to give or start an ISIS jobs program so that, rich terrorists from Belgium and France wouldn't go to Syria to fight. And I thought, what are we doing here? Okay. I got it. There are some socioeconomic issues that drive people into being terrorists in places like Somalia and other places like that. But the average guy in Syria is from France, Germany, Belgium, the United States, Australia, Canada, places like that. So that kind of got me to like, are we really looking at the battlefield the same way? And as we kind of kept on, I could see that we were trying to, you know, the focus that we were still fighting hard and everything, I thought was not where it needed to be. And the troops weren't being reinforced on how to, that, we got to be ready for the worst day of our life. And that's when, you know, I made the statement after going to Raqqa, Syria and saying, hey, the ISIS got two options. They can surrender or die. And if they surrender, we'll treat them humanely. But if not, we're going to kill them with extreme prejudice, whether that's dropping bombs, shooting them in the face, or beating them to death with an entrenching tool. And I put that in my report back to General Dunford and Secretary Mattis. And Secretary Mattis told me, hey, keep saying that. He said, because I'm talking about annihilating enemies. I'm not talking about just defeating. I'm talking about annihilating enemies. And that fits into what I'm trying to say. And it wasn't an issue until the media got a hold of it. And the media that kind of leans in a certain direction, and they thought I was advocating for war crimes. And they thought I was saying things that I shouldn't have been saying, even though my two bosses had said, I want you to continue to say that, and then it spilled over to members in active duty. I'm talking about general officers and flag officers. I'm talking about senior enlisted were starting to criticize me that I would say something like that. And one even came into my office and said, hey, what would General Dunford think about this? And I said, why don't you go down and ask him? Because he was on stage with me in Kabul, Afghanistan when I was saying it, okay? But my point in all of this is I was starting to grow frustrated that, all of a sudden the brand of leadership that, you and I talk about all the time, about calling it like it is and saying, this is what you ought to be doing. It was starting, the allure was starting to come off of it. And it was more trying to be politically correct. And then as a senior enlisted guy, you have a certain spot where you should be seen and not heard. And I started getting frustrated. And then I had an Air Force E9, same age as me, same service as me, file an IG complaint against me. And I was in the penalty box for 6 months. And so I had a lot of time to reflect then. I watched every episode of every season of Moonshiner. So if anybody wants some good moonshine, let me know, But when I came back from that, I said, look, I'm going to finish out my tours of the SEAC with honor. And then I'm going to move out and I'm going to continue to do the things I'm doing now to take care of troops, veterans, and families. So I will tell you, Josh, I left on 13 December. Absolutely proud that I served for almost 38 years. Absolutely proud that I served as a senior enlisted person in the Department of Defense. But I haven't looked back. Not one day have Sandra and I, my wife and I, said, man, I wish we were back in DC, and I wish that I was still the SEAC. I miss being around the troops. I miss being able to go anywhere in the world to visit our troops and everything, and to build these partnerships and alliances, with this global senior enlisted network that we developed, and guys like Spud Spadaro helped me do. But now I'm from a position now where I am still getting after helping troops, families, and veterans, but I'm doing it from a place that I don't have to worry about somebody trying to use me as a political weapon or somebody try to put me back into a hole. And I will tell you, I am just having a great time. So my message is this. All of us have a shelf life, and we have to understand that, especially when we get to senior positions, that this may be the last job that we have, and we may have to retire. And we've got to be prepared for that. This may be our last job and move out. And then what we got to do is, how do we take our professional reputation in the military, and if we still have goals we want to reach in the corporate world, how do we turn the professional reputation that we've had, where we've lived by this selfless service for decades, and how do we turn this into a personal brand that will allow us to continue to be attractive to corporations and businesses, and allow us to have a comfortable lifestyle for our families, but more importantly, allow us to continue to give back to the troops that are serving, family members, and how do we assist our veterans? And so when I tell people the best thing that ever happened in the United States military, and we talked about, is the 360-degree survey, because, it's easy for us to take advice from our superiors and our peers, but when our subordinates have a voice and tell us, hey, you might be a jerk, that allows us to hopefully to do a reflection and say, I need to adjust myself as a leader so that I am not this person that's perceived as being a jerk. So, because I will tell you, somebody that has a terrible reputation in the military, when you get out, that reputation will follow you, unfortunately. And that's just the way it is. And so I'm not saying that we got to turn into a bunch of suck asses or cheese balls while we're on active duty, but certainly you got to be somebody that is a leader of character, a leader of consequence, somebody that's transformational, meaning that you look upon your subordinates like you look upon your children, as with the same love, and sometimes it's the same tough love where you got to kick them in the ass and everything, instead of being transactional leaders that base things off of, hey, if we get the job done, I'll get you off at noon today. Or, what I'm the kind of leader that tries to be popular more than effective. So transition has been good for me. And that's a long-winded answer, but this is something I'm passionate about now, especially when, people like me were being looked at like, what are you going to do when you retire? Go work at range control on JBLM, or are you going to go work at Lowe's or something? And I thought to myself, almost 40 years in the military, retired as a SEAC, have a master's degree in business administration with a concentration in strategic leadership. General, I think I can compete for the same jobs that you're going after. And unfortunately, there was an Air Force general that got the horns on that one. But my point in all of this is transition is as good as you make it. And if we haven't been preparing for it and it comes up on us, it could be tough. But if we prepare for it and we go out and get after it, good thing, and that transition will be seamless, and you'll be able to get right after your personal goals that you had getting out, that were professional goals when you were in. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So we're gonna transition. Speaking of transitions, and we're gonna go into some questions from the audience. So I should have James Breckenridge with the ability to talk. James, can you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you, man. Go
James,
ahead
what's
with your.
up, brother?
Hey, Sergeant Major, how are you? It's great to see you again. Always great to hear your great words of wisdom. So, you know, after all the webinars I've got to hear from you and talk to you and stuff, I don't know if I've ever heard of what your most memorable moment in the Army was. And so, Sergeant Major, I know it's probably hard after all those years. I know it would be hard for me to answer, but entertain us. What's your most memorable moment in your career? Over.
You know, I'm an armor guy, and but I've always been in infantry land. I've always been around guys like Josh Powers and folks like that, and serving, in the 82nd for all those years. You know, um, when somebody shakes your hand in the 82nd, you know how it is, Josh. They shake your hand, they immediately look at your left shoulder, whether you got a Ranger tab or not. And at the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence, it's the same way with engineers now. Where they're looking for that sapper tab and everything. And I told myself, I'm going to go do the things that traditional armor guys don't do, but I want to do to show people that we can do it. And I will tell you, one of a monumental thing for me was on the 12th of July, 1996, graduating from Ranger School, and as an armor guy, and as a sergeant first class as well at the time, and being around a bunch of second lieutenants in that class who are now brigade combat team commanders. Um, that was one of the key ones. But I will tell you, for initial day, that was very important to me because it was a personal accomplishment. But there's just too many, and you're James. I know you're the same way. When somebody comes in to talk to you and wants advice, and I tell people all the time, if you're a battalion sergeant major or a brigade sergeant major, if you're a battalion sergeant major and your company commanders and platoon leaders are coming in to talk to you looking for advice, you're probably pretty relevant in your battalion, and you probably are well respected. And at the brigade level, if battalion commanders and company commanders or field grade officers are coming to talk to you and looking for advice, you're probably well respected in doing the things you ought to be doing. Anytime somebody came to me to look for advice, that was something that told me I must be doing something right, because this person trusts me enough that they are going to come to me and seek my kind of counsel. And when it's somebody that outranks you that's doing that, that goes a long way. So I just think those kind of moments you can't replace. And if you're looking for something as a leader, and you know this, James, being a senior sergeant major yourself, uh, to kind of look at yourself and say, hey, am I doing what I'm expected to be doing? When people like that are coming to ask you for advice, that goes a long way. And those moments will always be special to me. Even today, when people reach out to me, now I get a lot of folks that I serve with that may have only served for 4 or 5 years, but spent 2 tours in combat, and they're struggling with how to deal with everyday life. And, whether it's 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they're reaching out to me. I'm making sure that I'm available to talk to those kind of people. Because as Josh said earlier, that may be a call that prevents that person from doing something that could really go bad. So I hope that answers your question, brother.
Yeah, it does, Sergeant Major, and thanks for that. I appreciate it. Just always great to hear, some, you know, I know it's a tough question because after so many years, you have a lot of things, but I just want to wish Sandra happy Mother's Day, and thanks for all that you do, Sergeant Major, and continue to mentor and groom us for the future. Thank you so much.
All
Out here.
right, James, keep kicking ass out there, brother. You're doing great work, man.
Well, thank you very much. And Fort Leonard Wood is always behind you, Sergeant Major. So thanks.
All right, so public service announcement for everybody that's just so you don't forget, it is Mother's Day tomorrow. It is Mother's Day tomorrow, and everybody out there has a mother, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so next up, we're going to go over to Carl Cunningham. Carl, you got
Yeah, I'm here.
all right, go ahead with your question.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My question for Sergeant Major Troxell is, do you feel there's a generation of the Army that wants senior NCOs and Sergeant Majors to be more officer-like? And do you think that's why some NCOs criticize others? And your comment earlier kind of steered me toward that because I've been a
Yeah.
Sergeant Major for 5 years now, and I've seen a lot of that in my branch specifically. Over.
So I think what we have to be more of as senior enlisted, especially as sergeant majors, is we have to be operationally relevant. And I will tell you, as the SEAC, sitting in a meeting where it could be the Secretary of Defense, the chairman, the vice chairman, all of these 3 stars from the Joint Staff, or it could be a tank with all of the service chiefs. I've got to be able to provide information that's relevant for them to make strategic level decisions. I still do the same kinds of things at that level that sergeant majors do, and that's going out and getting the pulse of the force and things like that. And but I couldn't be up there talking about, hey, we got to really get after police call in the Pentagon, and I saw 2 cigarette butts out in the river entrance parking lot, things like that. Don't get me wrong, discipline is important at all levels, okay? But in order for us to be relevant, we have to be able to provide commanders information that is consistent with what their vision and their priorities are. And sometimes, in order to be better advisors to commanders, I think we've got to be educated in some ways that will make us better advisors. For instance, I've attended the Army Strategic Leader Development Program, which was the precursor to what you see now with Capstone and some of the other things that general officers do. I was one of the first enlisted to do that with general officers, not to make me a general officer, but allow me to give an enlisted perspective on this and be a better advisor to general officers. And so I think where we go wrong is where some sergeant majors think that we're being educated. And I'm not trying to be critical of anybody. We're trying to be educated. And all of a sudden we think we have the authority and responsibilities that commanders and officers have. And that is absolutely not the case. And, as the SEAC, I was a senior enlisted guy in DOD and I had zero authority, zero. All I could do was give best military advice to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs Staff and the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Council on what my opinion is on how we ought to be doing business in terms of the national military and national defense strategy, or how we should do rules of engagement and stuff. That's it. And I think where we get kind of in trouble is where we start thinking we have authorities and we have responsibilities that are for commanders and officers, and we think all of a sudden we have that. And that's 99.9% of the time is not the case. There are some instances where you got people that are commandants and things like that they may have some kind of authority and everything, but for the vast majority of us, we provide best military advice. And if our military advice is not taken because there's another course of action we're going, we can't take it personally. We got to just, okay, you asked me for my advice, we're going a different direction. All of a sudden now I own the direction that we're going in. So I hope that gets after your question. The idea is, and I used to say this all the time when I would send senior enlisted to the Joint and Combined Warfighter School at the Joint Forces Staff College, where a lot of, Josh Powers and a lot go to attend. I'm not here to make senior enlisted into officers. I'm here to make them better advisors to officers. And that's the way we got to go as we move forward.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, thanks, Carl. Appreciate it, brother.
And I'd just like to highlight Carl is one of those guys out on the front. He wrote a great article for my blog last year that had more traction. It was from the perspective of a sergeant major's advice to a new field grade officer. And I mean, just an amazing article. So he's one of the guys where it's not like, I'm a sergeant major, I only do the things that I do. He's out there, he's exploring, getting things done and still fulfilling the role. It just.
So can I give a quick example, Josh, so I'll give one personal example of what I was getting at as the SEAC. So there was a lot of bad things going on in the U.S. Africa Command area of responsibility. And Somalia was, we were starting to take some casualties there and everything. And obviously the chairman and the secretary of defense are going to get information from the combatant command and the service component command, and information is going to come back up that way. But there's nothing like a commander or a senior leader like the chairman or secretary of defense getting real-time information from their trusted agent, their SEAC. And so here we were with a critical task at AFRICOM to defeat al-Shabaab, the offshoot of al-Qaeda in Somalia, through security force assistance. Okay, meaning training Somali forces to defeat this threat, which isn't going to happen anytime soon, I can tell you this much. But so I went on the ground there, and I went out and visited some units in southern Somalia and everything. And what I realized on the ground is here was a task for these tactical level units to defeat. And a doctrinal term, defeat, means a lot of things. And their job was to defeat this threat through security force assistance, but they did not have the requisite joint fires. They didn't have requisite ISR. They didn't have the golden hour of medevac, and the dang personnel recovery assets were in Djibouti, like 3.5 hours away. And last, but and most importantly, they didn't have the authorities or the rules of engagement to engage a mass force of al-Shabaab fighters because they weren't doing anything militarily to the U.S. unit. And then they only had the authorities to go to the last cover and conceal position. So the point was, I took that information, I sent it to the chairman and secretary of defense. I said, we got two options here, in my opinion. We either give them the equipment they need in terms of what I just talked about, which, we didn't have the ability to do that at the time, or give them the authorities they need to do first strikes on al-Shabaab targets. And the Secretary of Defense went to President Trump, got the authorities, and they put the authorities down there on the unit. And now the tactical level leader had the time and space to continue to influence the fight with the partner force because they could drop bombs on the enemy if they need to. My point in all of that is that's what we do as senior enlisted leaders. We go on the ground to the tactical level, even though we might be operating at the strategic level. We get the pulse of what's going on. We listen to leaders on the ground. We observe through our decades of experience what we think is going on, and then we give that best military advice. Now, if our bosses say, no, yeah, thanks for the advice, but we're not going that way, then we can't take it personal. We're doing exactly what we're supposed to do, and in the end, the commander or the chairman or SecDef has to make that decision. So that's one of the examples that I use.
All right, awesome. That's crystal clear. Now, so I'm throwing a wild card in here. We're going to see if it works out. If it doesn't, that's fine, because I don't have the live feed going today, so it's all good. So I just promoted Coach Tony Spadaro to a panelist, and if he wants to push one button on his computer, he can come on live right now, and I can be on with two of my favorite former NCOs in the world.
Aloha.
Here, we can hear him. He can turn his camera on if he wants to, but he may.
Hey, Marine, stop eating your crayons and turn your camera on.
Look at this, man. I am with my brother. God, this is the best.
What's up, brother?
Well, I just wanted to be here between the two of you. So you guys just chat for a minute, pretend like the rest of us aren't here.
No, God, is this the best? I mean, I just put it up there. John Wayne Troxell is on my demigod, my pantheon of the best that I got to serve for and alongside. And just even here, Josh, having JWT on like this with this forum, hearing what's going on, people are getting tired of this message. And look at that message that he spanned. It all comes down to something that we learned a long time ago. It's about the people. Man, I'm emotional right now.
Hey, so, one of the other things that, what was great working with guys like Spuds is that, one of the things, and this is for all the sergeant majors that are out there, we hate talking to the media. We absolutely hate it. And Marines absolutely loathe speaking to the media. And I felt that for 4 years in the Pentagon, I was like, the chairman goes in and speaks to the Pentagon Press Corps, the SecDef, the chiefs of staff of the services, and all of these generals and admirals speak. but they don't hear from the guys that truly have the pulse of the troops. So one of my defense senior enlisted leader councils, I told all the service guys and all the combatant command guys, we are going to start engaging with the Pentagon Press Corps. And Tony Spadaro was one of the guys that just absolutely embraced it. Now, there were others out there that were kicking and screaming, going in, and I won't go into particulars for the last one we did, Spuds, but somebody that everybody on this webinar would know very well really did some of the most unprofessional stuff to try and sabotage that press conference. But Spuds was one that embraced it. And when we went in front of the Pentagon Press Corps, whether it was Fox News, CNN, ABC, New York Times, Washington Post, whoever it was, when we started talking about the actual acts of what was going on around the world with the men and women and how they were getting after business, they couldn't get enough of it. And all of a sudden we were asked to come back and again. So the point to that is that this thing kind of took off because guys like Spuds was on board to get after that. And so he and I have always been, very close. We went to Taiwan together. We went to Korea together. We've been to, we went to New Zealand when there was a dang earthquake in the 24th floor of the hotel. I thought the hotel was going to flip over. Hey, let me ask you something. How has your transition been?
It was great. Hey, thanks, Siak, for bringing that up, because Josh brought that up. And I said, what I think the most difficult part has been, but you said that, it's the people. And, all that psychic energy we've gotten being around the finest men and women in society. So that's where, it's been hard. But like I told Josh and the crew last week, we have aligned ourselves. You told me what you're doing in transition. You know what I'm doing in transition. We've aligned ourselves with organizations with the same ethics, values, and that commonality that still allows us to be with the people. So that's why we've all jumped into human wellness performance. So that's been the easy part of transition, is that I've aligned myself with the same values. And I stress that to anyone that is in this position now. You want to go to organizations that are going to represent you and what your aim point was, what you're doing in the military. For us, it was the people. How do we now improve? You're doing stuff with Veterans Lendings Group, which is amazing. Again, encourage, this is what's available. All the other stuff we are doing now, and that's what I try to tell Josh, that audience, find that. There's your common aim point. Get on that.
Hey, and here's the phrase I use, Josh. When your time is up in uniform, when you're done, you're done. And let me tell you when that really hit me is I go to get my blue ID card, JBLM, Waller Hall, and go in there, you take a number, and you sit down, and here comes some PFC, there's civilians and there's soldiers working in there. And a PFC comes out, 34, and hey, that's me. And they bring you in, they take your CAT card, the kid just doing his job, right? And he says, sit down in the chair, look at the camera, and takes a picture, fills out the card, and hands me the blue ID card. All right, move out, next. My point is this, okay? Yeah, could I have ripped into this kid because, he wasn't recognizing me as the SEAC or whatever? No, I'm done. In the matter of seconds, I'm going to have a blue ID card, and I need to embrace that. And I need to go out and get after the things and be goal-oriented, just like I was in uniform. So when you're done, you're done. There's no looking back. It's only going forward now.
Hey, Josh, could you hit up, though, the SEAC on something I feel that needs to be brought out to the audience? And I think this is probably one of the highest hallmarks of his time as a SEAC. It was not only growing the joint force, and that was through PME hard adherence, but more or less, and I'm really proud of that I got to be part of this with the SEAC, is our coalition network that now has really demonstrated to the world the power of senior enlisted leaders now. And like I said, I think it needs to be heard, because we need more to sit there and encourage this coalition network now. Glenn, come on now.
Yeah. One of the things, as here we are, when I was in Afghanistan 2011 and 12 as the IJC Sergeant Major, we had 49 other nations there. I come back from that, I go to, UNC, CFC, USFK as the senior enlisted leader there. And I'm with the ROC military every day, but also the UN sending states I'm working with a lot and everything. And then with the rebalance in the Pacific, Josh, that you and I were a part of, you know, doing things with Talisman Sabre and all these others, I knew that in order for us to continue to be relevant, to be capable, and to be able to deter any kind of Chinese, Russian, North Korean, Iranian aggression, we had to be strong with our alliances and partnerships. And in terms of developing tactical level leaders that can execute mission command within commander's intent, agile and adaptive thinking within commander's intent, and be able to get after the mission and accomplish it without being supervised, that we needed to grow this coalition. And so, you know, we just developed this network around the world where routinely now the SEAC in New Zealand may be talking to the SEAC in Romania, and the SEAC in Hungary may be talking to the SEAC in South Korea. And in between all of this is all of us United States guys that are helping them. Spud's at US Indo-Pacific Command, where he developed this wonderful network out there. And then globally, where it kind of culminated at my retirement ceremony that week. Spuds, I think we had 39 international SEACs at our final conference right there. And from every continent on the planet, minus Antarctica, you know, but, you know, we had from Mali, from, you know, the South Africa, from the Middle East, you know, from all over the world, we had this global network. And I think that's what was, you know, Chairman Milley was so impressed about, is that we were able to bring that together. And I just think as we continue to move forward here, that's something that this generation of active duty senior enlisted leaders, the current SEAC and the current COCOM and service senior enlisted, all the way down to the tactical level, have to embrace as we move forward, is building these kind of global networks, this alliance and partnerships that will allow us not only to be able to work together, but will allow us to be able to fight better together as well.
Hey, SEAC, real quick, I'm trying to break in on Josh, but this is something I know I learned from you, and we pushed this last week talking to Josh about, though, is that you also had that soft spot, in a good way, for field grade leaders, because you knew they're the ones in 10 years from now are going to be general officers. And I think that was one of the questions posed to me last week that really got to me, is where do we want to see this next? Where Josh Powers, when he's General Powers, and he's sitting there, he's going to be that difference maker.
Yeah, I just, you know, yesterday I was on a conversation with a guy that is a very close personal friend of mine, and he and his wife are very close to me and Sandra, and he is the current 3rd Brigade 10th Mountain Commander, Colonel Kendall Clark, and we were in the same squad in Ranger School together, 2nd Lieutenant Clark and Sergeant First Class Troxell. And I told a story about, you know, here we are in the Derby phase, and he and I got stuck on water resupply. And anybody that's been to Ranger School, Josh, you know what I'm talking about. You take these duffel bags full of empty canteens down to the water source, which is not bad because it weighs like 5 pounds going down. And you fill all these canteens up, put them in the duffel bags and carry them back. And listening to now Colonel Clark talk, Clark had like 6 duffel bags and Troxell had like 2 1-quart canteens. And the other 2 second lieutenants that were with us might have been carrying a 1-quart. But in reality, it was Troxell that was doing the heavy lifting, all right? But the point being is, our relationship was born out of that. And then, you know, as we move forward and he moved up through the ranks and he became an aide-de-camp to my boss at the time, General Ben Frakely. We had a bond and a relationship there, much like Josh and I had when he was the aide-de-camp to General Bob Brown, the commander of 1st Corps when I was the 1st Corps Sergeant Major. And I see guys like that, like Josh, like the Kendall Clarks, or Dave Voorhees, who was the aide-de-camp to General Scaparrotti before you, Josh. I look at these guys and I said, this is the future of our military. And my job as a senior enlisted leader is to make sure, one, that they understand, I don't care how high you go up. I don't care if you become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You got to have somebody that will have the intestinal fortitude to walk in and tell you that you don't have any clothes on, Emperor. But 2, that they understand that there's a responsibility that comes with that as they continue to move up and develop. And it's our job was to take tactical level leaders that were going to be superstars and make sure that they were understood the direction they ought to be going through the operational and into the strategic ranks. And I just think that's what mentorship is all about. You know, it's not about so much what we can do about it. It's how can we set the future of our United States military? Because in the end, and I'll say this, Spuds, the next, if all of a sudden Josh and the boys are going to combat tomorrow in Korea, you and I are going to be out there on the runway with these painted signs that say, stay safe, you know, Josh, we love you, you know, and we're going to be the ones that are handing out USO burgers when they come back and stuff like that, you know, and, you know, this is their fight now, and it's our job to make sure that we continue to support them, but also there when they're looking for, you know, any kind of sage advice or mentorship or whatever it is.
And that keyword support, not criticize, nor condemn. We've been involved. We know too much. We've seen too much. And I think that's part of this. That's support they need. They don't need condemnation or Monday morning quarterbacking, because this is the fight in front of them now.
Yeah, this is not my fight now. You know, it does me no good to call the First Corps Sergeant Major over here and say, you know, hey, look, what are you doing about the mold in the barracks over there? Do I want troops to live in a healthy environment? Absolutely. But if I wanted it to be fixed, then I should have fixed it in the 38 years that I served. This is their fight, and I'm confident that this current level of force that we have and the future force is going to be able to take our nation places that you and I couldn't in our last 3+ decades.
Yeah.
All right, Josh. I'm done
All
talking
right.
to this guy. He's been on a 3-week drunk here.
Hey, favorite
Got a
Sopranos
crazy beard. Like, all right. Hey, so we're gonna get ready to close this one out. So Sergeant Major Troxell, John Wayne Troxell, I really appreciate you being on here today. I appreciate you being flexible, and I apologize to everybody who's watching this tape because they couldn't get into the live feed. So, Sergeant Major, I wanted to hand it over to you for closing.
Yeah. So, Josh, thanks again for having me. I think this is wonderful what you're doing here with the field grade leader. Spuds, my brother, I love you, man. Keep doing what you do. I mean, hey, look, we're already doing things in the corporate world together, and we're going to continue to do things to continue to get after supporting our troops and our veterans and families and everything out there. And I would just say this, you know, as we continue to move forward, you know, we've got, you know, a lot of challenges ahead of us as a nation. Forget about the coronavirus right now. Let's take a look at, you know, we've got this long-term power competition in front of us with China and Russia. You know, we've got these emerging warfare domains that I spoke about earlier that we're going to have to continue to have competitive advantages in. And then rogue nations like Iran and North Korea are always going to be a threat as we move forward. And not in this lifetime are we going to stop seeing terrorism around the world and insurgents moving into places to try to become shadow governments or overthrow legitimate governments and continue to do things that could be a threat to our homeland. So we've got a tough road to hold. But I can tell you this, and this is one of the things that I used to talk about all the time. You know, there's 3 things that I know about the United States military. One is we still have competitive warfighting advantages in every domain, you know, air, ground, sea, nuclear, space, and cyber. The last 3 have eroded a little bit, but we're getting back after that. We can meet our alliance commitments and be there when our partners need us, and we can defend our homeland and our way of life. But the thing I know the most about is that out of all those warfighting domains that we have competitive advantages, the greatest advantage we have is in the human domain. No other nation in the world trains, educates, trusts, and empowers people like the United States military. And I will tell you, when you look at things like the field grade leader here that Josh is doing, or the NCOPD lives that NCOs are doing, like Staff Sergeant D. Hicks, and all of these other podcasts and webinars, these are all geared to continue to build on that greatest domain we have, or the warfighting advantage we have in the human domain. So Josh, my hat's off to you this. We got to continue to push forward, you know, through this coronavirus, because I can tell you bad people will try to take advantage of it and try to look that we may be eroding a little bit readiness-wise. But in the end, we're going to be able to get after those three things I talked about. And I'm confident of that as we move forward. So thanks again, Josh. Thanks for everybody tuning in. And like I said, Josh, I'm here in Lakewood, Washington. I'm doing a lot of things. But if anybody wants to chat, you want to have a virtual happy hour and have some moonshine with me, just reach out, because we train hard, we fight hard, therefore we ought to play hard too. So God bless you all. Thanks again, Josh.
All right, outstanding. Thanks everybody for joining us. If you're watching this one taped, throw us a thumbs up, give us a follow if you'd like, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good rest of your day.